Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast AI, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. I'm Paul Davenport, Boast resident tech journalist, and today I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Mike Weider, co-founder and CEO of Frugal AI. At Frugal, Mike and his team are empowering developers to reduce the cost of applications using the world's first AI-native application cost engineering platform. Their solution automatically fixes inefficient code patterns that run up cloud spend, helping bridge that friction that comes between finance and engineering teams, and ultimately helping deliver more agile products. Frugal was founded by veteran startup entrepreneurs and engineers with a proven track record of building world-class companies, which is where Mike comes in. Mike has served as a founder and CEO at 3 previous venture-backed startups that have all gone on to major acquisitions. But beyond that, Mike has served as an independent board member of numerous businesses and nonprofits in the startup space, while continuing to be an active seed investor in his own right. So, needless to say, he has an incredible perspective on the startup and tech ecosystem in Canada and across North America. So I cannot wait to pick his brain on his work today and what's ahead as 2026 kicks off. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome to have you. So I didn't mention this in the intro, but we first connected with you back in November at SaaS North. It was a
That's
very
right. Yeah.
exciting, yeah, it was an exciting week for the Boast team because Budget 2025 had dropped, so we got to talk about Shred with everybody. But we met you at the TechTO stage where everyone was giving really impressive pitches. And so I'd like to hear, before we dive into Frugal, because I do have that background from just seeing you present, put your best foot forward at the
Yeah, right.
TechTO Rocket Stage. Tell us a little bit about Mike. I laid the scene, but I want to hear from you. What's your genesis story? How'd you get into the tech ecosystem and just the startup space in general?
Yeah, so basically I've been doing startups my entire career, and I graduated from engineering and happened to get a job with a startup in Ottawa and moved there. And I was one of the first half a dozen employees and kind of was part of seeing how a company is built from scratch. And through that kind of demystified the process a little bit to the extent that I felt when I had an idea for my first business, just felt a little bit of the confidence to go out and go out on my own. And at the time, I was only 26, so didn't know what I didn't know. But yeah, it was, I think, helpful to be part of another startup to begin with, to sort of, open your eyes to what's possible.
I love that. So you have more or less throughout the entire course of your career born and bred in the startup ecosystem. So it was demystified for you at the start. At 26, I remember where I was at 26. It was also in the startup space. But one
Yeah.
thing I wasn't doing was anything nearly as technical as some of the work that you've been doing. So you mentioned you got that engineer's background. This brings us to Frugal. So this is a beautiful solution for engineers specifically. It's an Ottawa-based company. Tell me about how Frugal came to be and what was the genesis of building the solution and, yeah, some of the problems that you're solving for engineers today.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone who's been building software today is probably pretty familiar with the issue of cloud costs. And it's been just growing and growing, but most companies are spending roughly 10% of what they bring in revenue goes to paying off their Amazon or Google bill for hosting their applications. And now with AI coming on, that's like another cost that's adding to the pile and making something that was painful in some cases now unsustainable. And so I was chatting with my co-founder, Craig, who we've worked with at 2 previous other startups. And Craig actually was working at another larger company that was managing a $30 million cloud bill. And we were lamenting about how difficult it was to get engineers to spend any time focusing on cost. And, engineers, it's not like they don't care per se. It's just that it's not a major focus. And partly we started talking about, well, what's the root cause of that? And mainly it's that when you're writing code as a developer, you actually don't know what things are going to cost immediately. And it's only later when it gets into production that and they get some usage on that app those costs now become apparent. But by that time, no one ever gets the time to go back and fix things. And so we're all so busy shipping the next feature for customers And no one ever really has the time to sort of go back and refactor the code to make it more efficient. It's only every once in a while we have a recession or some kind of cost crunch that everybody says, "Hey, we should focus on cost a little bit," and then we do that for a month, and then we stop and we go on. And my last company was acquired by Akamai, and inside Akamai, we saw that they were actually really focused on on the margins and costs, and whereas the first company we really saw that had good discipline around this issue, where every new application had a cost review and was really thoroughly analyzed, and we said, this wouldn't it be great if if every application had and every engineer had a cost review as part of the new code they're developing. And so that was the genesis of the idea was, hey, can we create a cost engineer with AI that would be a co-pilot or partner to engineers to help review new code, explain to them the implications of the changes they're making, make recommendations for how it could be better, but also going and looking at what your current spend is and identifying opportunities that areas where companies could save a lot of money. So that was kind of the original genesis and thinking behind Frugal.
I love that. Okay, so I started taking notes the second you started talking because there's several points I want to pull back on. First off, Akamai, very familiar. I'm the Bostonian on the Boast team, so
Okay, yeah, yeah,
been
yeah.
by
They're a
their
big deal
Cambridge
in
offices
Boston.
many times. Yep. Oh, yeah. I've got some friends who actually work in the marketing department over there, so
Okay,
need to give Akamai a bit of a shout out. But the point you were making with that is Akamai is a massive business, so they have the resources. They are already at the scale to be able to kind of look at that cost review and to be able to do that and have it be standardized and something that people can execute. But to your point, when you're a small team or a small company and you don't have those resources, you're actually just building the apps themselves and you're building the products and solutions. You need something like what Frugal is providing to automate that, but also just, again, give that line of sight into costs that is not the focus of the engineers or the developers or what have you building these new products. I want to call back to that just because it's an ethos we share very deeply here at Boast. We want engineers and developers and the people doing the R&D and building the cool stuff focus on driving that innovation. Don't let us distract
that's
you
right.
from that to drag you down on R&D tax credits. That's kind of the financial burden that we try to take off of their shoulders
Right,
because that could be a full-time job for an engineer. In fact, when you look at how much time people who do it themselves apply to it, you're paying for
yeah,
an extra engineer that's now not focused on driving innovation. So I think there's a lot of just one-to-one there in terms of, okay,
right. A lot of parallels. Yeah,
yeah, finance wants to focus on getting every cost down. And I want to call back to that other point too. 10% goes to cloud hosting. I almost think that's probably even conservative. I mean, even with the point you made about I love how you said it. It went from painful to unsustainable just because you can't not have it today. Even thinking about the funding programs that we work with, like CDAE in Quebec, starting for the year 2025 or 2026 when they're going to be doing the claims, you have to prove an AI component to actually qualify for some of that funding now. So it's not like you can't pay for these cloud costs or you can't actually look for that hosting capacity because you need it to get the solutions that are going to make you marketable, but also make you qualify for the things to actually give you the runway and bring the new products to market. So just wanted to pull back on those cool points. But again, like, how difficult it is to get engineers to focus on cost. I think that's incredible, but I think it's your perspective also at being at other startups. You mentioned Craig. He was at two previous startups before this too, your current co-founder. Could you tell me a little bit more about just like what your experiences were with those
sure.
other startups? Yeah. And how you brought
Yeah,
them to the acquisition point and the success that you did.
yeah. I mean, we've so as I mentioned, I've worked previously on three other startups before Frugal, but there was a sort of common thread that came through a bunch of them. So Watchfire was the first one. We were finding security vulnerabilities in software and helping developers fix those issues. At Blaze, we were finding performance issues and helping developers fix those things. And so the sort of common thread amongst a lot of these things is that we spent a lot of time in developer tools, the developer ecosystem, helping to examine applications for deficiencies of some sort or the other and building solutions for that. But another pattern that we've seen is that if you take security, for example, it used to be that developers would write code, they'd throw that, over the fence to these pen testers or security folks who would look at this and say, bleep, no, you made some errors. You got to go back and fix those before we go live. Or worse yet, they'd actually put it in production and then they'd only find it later, kind of like the cost bugs that we were talking about. And so then we got smarter and we started building security into how we write software. And now, most software teams will have some kind of code review tool that's looking for vulnerabilities in the code they're writing. And so we think that the same parallel is going to happen with cost, and that it's an issue which is found way downstream in a very reactive way. And what we're trying to do is, they call it shifting left, meaning we're pushing an issue upstream, trying to catch it more proactively or earlier in the process. Because it's just way easier to find it while I'm creating something than it is to wait and let it manifest into a bigger issue. And it's just way more expensive to solve the problem. And so, we've created a bunch of businesses and have a playbook that we've sort of successfully run for those. And it comes with creating some amazing technology. Obviously, you've got to have a product which is working and can find, in our case, cost bugs, or in the other businesses, security bugs. But there's also a little bit of um, evangelism, let's call it, or creation of the market, and that we need to sort of also change how people are doing things. And that today they don't, nobody really looks at cost as they write code. And so we have to help establish that as a new norm. And so that's not necessarily a technical issue, it's more of a cultural issue and a thought leadership issue. But it's something that we've seen before in these previous businesses, and we think, you can see the future. And I'm very, very confident that, you know, in the future, everybody will be doing cost reviews as part of how they write code, and you can see that very clearly. And so it's really about, our mission is to help accelerate that and make that possible.
Just wrapping up a few notes because I mentioned before we hit record on all of this that I'm actually coming back from CES in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah, and we connected with a company at one of the events, Cadstrom, out of Montreal. And I was surprised to find another Canadian company literally at the table next to us.
Right.
They're almost taking a similar approach to what Frugal is doing, but in terms of actually building hardware. We were at a hardware showcase, and they emphasized, not word for word, but very similarly, that point about that thought leadership and that evangelism, because their solution tries to help identify for like electrical engineers issues with their circuit boards before they start building them. So again, it's getting proactive about it. It's trying to
Right.
identify the problems before you're so far down the line that there's no cost-effective way to reasonably retroactively correct these problems. You're down Schitt's Creek, more or less. So that just came to mind immediately while we were talking about that. But to your point, there's a shift, I think, in the status quo that is happening because these solutions are coming out and because we're seeing that, like, sure, we can move fast. AI is enabling us to do more quicker, and it's making people hungry to get these solutions out to market. But cost checks are going to become even more critical as mistakes start piling up. And as these
Yeah.
products don't get to market in time, or as things get clunkier, or just the efficiencies are missed because people aren't just taking that, all right, let's go through, look at the costs and see what this is going to actually play out for. It calls back to that whole, like, let's let innovators and engineers do what they want to do without overextending their resources. But
Yeah.
we can't leave the finance side off the table because you got to identify where these problems are going to be and do
Yeah.
everything you can to
And
minimize.
you're absolutely right. And I think, AI is an incredible productivity tool. Um, but it's doing a couple things to software development. So software development is really on the leading edge of AI. Like there's probably no industry that has adopted this with such benefit, where it is, it really is changing the whole industry of how we create applications. And what it's doing is a couple things. One is it's turbocharging the ability for developers to write code. One of our devs told us that he's written more code in the last 6 months at Frugal than he did 6 years in his last job. It's incredible. But at the same time, you're generating a larger volume of code. And as we all know, AIs can also generate bad code. And so you need those senior engineers to be able to look at that and understand what's good and what's bad. but also we're going to need other controls on how we create software to examine it for quality issues, for security issues, for cost issues, and make sure that it's developing efficient code. Last point, on the AI sort of implications is that AI itself, as we mentioned up front, is becoming a new cost. And what I'm observing is that the AI native companies like Frugal, who maybe started after November of 2022, the GPT moment, is, our cost, we're actually, our costs our AI costs are actually bigger than our traditional cloud costs. And so I think a lot of companies are going to be in that boat pretty soon. And so the whole cost of AI, once it's embedded and running within in a core part of your application, people who have done that and are AI native are seeing these costs go bananas. And that's putting kind of further pressure on what I spoke about before, a painful issue into an unsustainable issue. So it's kind of forcing, a change in how we do things to address this exploding problem.
Agree with so much that you emphasize there. And I'm glad that you called back to the painful to unsustainable, because I think that if not title of episode, huge takeaway that we really need to emphasize here. And it goes back to kind of the thought leadership that you had mentioned before too. It just, we all have to accept the realities of what it's going to cost to use these tools that make our lives easier or help make us work better or make us work faster or more agile. But it's going to come at a cost. And I think there's also got to be an understanding about I don't want to say the limitations on AI because Boast is also an AI company. We're Boast AI in the same way that I imagine
Right.
Frugal AI is. We're not AI native, but we also don't hang our entire hat on being an AI solution because, especially with things like R&D tax credits, where there's very subjective criteria, and there's always going to be subjective criteria that you have to communicate to the human evaluators at the end of the day. At the same time, AI is still learning. So we do have our tools that make it significantly easier for us to collect the data we need, to qualify the data accordingly. We still have that human who goes in and makes sure that we're not just writing a claim that will get accepted, but we're maximizing everything too, and that we're correcting and fine tuning the AI as we go. So, a little bit of a
Sure.
tangent. Keep on bringing it back to Boast. I couldn't not, but I think that that's just great to kind of talk about the new realities of AI and what that means for people who are building new solutions today. Now, another thing, taking AI out of the conversation, and we've talked about your experience in the startup space. I mentioned earlier, we met you as part of the Tech2 Rocket Ship Stage. I'm still in the habit of calling them TechTO. I know that they go by Tech2 now. Could you tell me a little bit about how you've leaned on community or just how you've leaned on others in your network, whether it's a personal or professional network, to build all the businesses or be part of the startups or get involved in the entrepreneurship ecosystem that you have been? Boast is all about it. I think having folks like you on this show is how we really demonstrate that we care about the tech that's coming out there, not just about getting their business, making sure that there is new innovative R&D possibilities out there for folks to capitalize on. But I'd love to hear, what has it looked like building new businesses and leaning on those partners in your ecosystem today?
Yeah, so we're our company is based out of Ottawa, Canada, and there's a very rich and robust community for startups in Ottawa. Probably everybody knows about Shopify as a great example, but there's a bunch of others. And I'm actually on the board of Invest Ottawa, which is our local kind of economic development agency that is helping to foster innovation and tech startups within the community. And they take companies from anywhere from new entrepreneurs with an idea to scale ups and help them through that journey in getting financing, in getting hiring people, in business advice, and all sorts of things. So we've definitely leaned on our community. I think also a big thing when you're creating a new company like Frugal is that you need beta customers and people to test this, and you need to just talk to as many possible people as as you can to sort of get feedback on your idea and your direction and where you're going. And so, we've had probably over 50 calls with heads of engineering, heads of finance, and folks that we've sort of pulled on from our past networks to validate the direction of where we're going, as well as become beta customers and testers. And that we've sort of had to build this solution, we need real data, because you can't just go and look at open source for cost issues. You need a live running application with real costs. And so we've had to recruit some partners to help us build this, but also just give us great advice. And can't say more about that in terms of just the need to sort of get out of the lab and get out of your office and talk to as many people as you can and make sure you're heading in the right direction.
I love to hear that. It's again very close to an ethos we have here at Boast. I immediately thought of Daniel Perry from the Canadian Council of Innovators, the CCI. Like we work with him to help gut check a lot of like when we're giving feedback to the government on what we want for the Shred program, for instance. He helped us validate, are these actually this is what we hear from our customers. Is this realistic of us to actually, like, push for this kind of shred regulation change? It's not one-to-one, like, he's not coming in and claiming shred using our platform, but we're tapping into the community, and especially, again, folks in Ottawa directly, who can give us that gut check on what we're doing, point us in the right direction, and then connect us with folks who will actually benefit from the solution now that we know we need to be driving with the work and the R&D that we do. So love to hear that community spirit. Again, get those customers in early, tap into your network. I think that's a huge theme of the show too. Probably goes without saying, but get those kind of champions of your brand early, even if they're
Absolutely,
just
yeah.
like if they're just folks who you went to college with, or even just like your neighbors. It varies based on your solution. Don't be afraid to ask for that champion, get their feedback, and make it so that they're actually very happy. Then broaden your scope. I'm not telling you
Absolutely.
anything you haven't heard before. And again, I'm
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
startup expert like you are, Mike. Did want to bring that point home. All right, so finally, I'd love to know what's next for Frugal in 2026. It's a new year. We're recording this in January, so things are just kicking off. I know we've got a very busy calendar in terms of the events and everything that Bose is going to be attending to meet more founders. But for Frugal, with everything going on in the world, what's on your roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been building really for the last year, and working, as I mentioned, with beta customers, but we're gearing up to ship the first real release of our solution at the end of Q1. So that's kind of our time frame. So moving from beta situation and building to really building out the go to market and launching the company. And we've assembled an incredible group of engineers to help build this. People that almost all of them we've worked with in one of our previous companies. That's the benefit of having done this three times before, as like where all the great engineers are, and we've kind of pulled them into our team. And now we need to do the same thing with our go to market and kind of build up a world class um, sales and marketing organization and really get the word out there. So Frugal is a very early company, but we're super excited about what's happening and super excited to launch the company in 2026 and start engaging customers and building our go to market.
That is fantastic. So again, 2026 is where things officially take off. It's where you officially start going to market and you bring people into the fold. I'm very happy for you guys, and I think that this is landing at the perfect time, obviously. Again, it's a way for teams that might not be as big as your Akamai's of the world, but to have the same level of vetting, quality assurance, and cost assurance that the big players can have so that you can eventually get to that point. So music to my ears, Mike. This was fantastic. Mike, I can't thank you enough for joining us on the show. Again, it was a pleasure connecting with you back in November. I'm glad 3 months later you're still happy to talk with us. And I'm hoping that we can check in again down the line and we have even more wins to start cheerleading for Frugal and Boast. So this was an absolute pleasure.
Great talking to you, Paul. Thanks very much for having me.